It is a chilling piece of footage now seen for the first time. A woman is observed retrieving a firearm just moments before taking her wife's life. In the end, she would offer a guilty plea, admitting to the crime. According to investigator Thomas, in a related vehicle arson, doorbell camera footage captured an individual believed to be Shakiya Perkins near the scene. In front of a camera, a woman sits, completely unaware that her life would end in a matter of seconds. The lens documented everything: her expression, her voice, her last moments of life, her final, chilling words. "I knew it all along, you son of a, and I'm going to beat your, don't play with me. I saw that with my own, and I mean that, and I mean that. You've been lying, oh, you're a liar, and I'm going to beat you. No, I ever." Suddenly, the sharp report of a gunshot cuts through the argument, and Cornishia Butler's life is extinguished before a digital audience of thousands. In the seconds before her death, Cornishia had spoken a terrible truth, a truth that ultimately sealed her fate. But what was it that she knew? And how did the situation escalate to a point where a woman could be executed on a live stream while every single warning sign flashed red? The answers are far more disturbing than one might imagine, exposing a systemic failure so profound that it cost Cornishia Butler everything she had. The full story of the case reveals a sequence of catastrophic errors. The incident immediately ignited a firestorm of online discussion, with viewers dissecting every frame of the tragic footage. The video spread rapidly across platforms, serving as a stark warning about the hidden realities of domestic violence. Cornishia Butler was 31 years old when her life was violently taken from her. She was the mother of 4 children who relied on her for their entire world. She provided them with love, a stable home, a sense of security, and the hope for a future. Those who were close to her remember a woman who worked relentlessly to support her family, a person who overcame every challenge thrown her way, and who held on to the dream of a better life for her children. She was born and raised in Tennessee, but eventually relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, in pursuit of new opportunities and a chance to start over. As with so many who moved to sprawling urban centers, she held the belief that a change in location could bring about a fundamental change in her life's trajectory. She was striving for more, not just for herself, but for her kids. What she sought was simple: safety, prosperity, and a measure of peace. At some point in her journey, Cornishia's path crossed with that of Shakiya Perkins. At 25 years old, Perkins was 6 years younger than Cornishia. Their relationship began in a way that was entirely unremarkable. There was an initial attraction, a sense of excitement, and the comfort of companionship. They built a life together, under the guise of what, at the time, must have felt like love. They lived in the same home, spoke of the same dreams, and looked toward a shared future. But just beneath that ordinary surface, a deep and dangerous dysfunction was taking root. Cornishia could not have known it then, but she was stepping into a psychological trap that would haunt her for the years to come. The relationship that had started with such promise would metastasize into the single greatest threat to her existence. And though she would try desperately to get out, the woman she once loved would ensure there was no escape. The warning signs were present. The episodes of violence were undeniable. The level of danger was steadily increasing. Yet, like countless other victims of domestic abuse, Cornishia was ensnared in a psychological cycle that is notoriously difficult to sever. It is a cycle sustained by a toxic mix of fear, misplaced hope, and the persistent, irrational belief that things could somehow improve. They would not. By October of 2021, the relationship between Cornishia Butler and Shakiya Perkins had devolved past a point of no return. The events of that month were not merely a dispute that had spiraled out of control. It was a calculated act of destruction, so severe that it left no ambiguity about the mortal danger Cornishia was facing. Shakiya Perkins doused Cornishia's Mercedes-Benz in accelerant and set it ablaze. The authorities were called to the scene. Perkins was arrested and faced a battery of serious charges: aggravated assault, criminal damage to property, terroristic threats, and first-degree arson. These were not minor infractions. They were significant felonies, each carrying the potential for a long-term prison sentence. The judicial system seemed to recognize the gravity of the situation, setting her bond at a substantial $70,000. But it was at this very juncture that the system began to catastrophically fail Cornishia. Shakiya Perkins posted the bond. She was released from custody and walked directly back into Cornishia's world, despite the pending criminal charges. Despite the clear evidence of escalating violence, and against all logic, the relationship did not end. It is this part of the story that individuals who have never been subjected to domestic violence find nearly impossible to comprehend. Why did Cornishia allow her back into her life? The question has no simple answer, because the psychology of abuse is never simple. Domestic violence functions within a well-documented pattern. Psychologists identify a tension-building phase, where the victim feels as though they are walking on eggshells, constantly trying to placate their abuser. Observers note that when individuals charged with these types of crimes are repeatedly released, and those situations ultimately culminate in homicide, it signifies a fundamental breakdown somewhere within the system. Following the tension is the explosion, the act of violence, the uncontrolled rage, the destruction, and then finally comes the phase of reconciliation. This is often referred to as the honeymoon period, a time when the abuser offers apologies, makes fervent promises to change, and masterfully convinces the victim that it was an aberration that will never be repeated. On September 13, 2021, a report from the city of South Fulton Police detailed a harrowing roadside encounter, alleging that Shakiya Perkins had weaponized her vehicle, striking Miss Butler's car once in an attempt to force her from the road before hitting it a second time. Official records noted that the two were separated when the incident occurred. 2 days later, on September 15, 2021, a new incident report was filed, in which Miss Butler stated that Miss Perkins had threatened to show up at her home to verify if she had a visitor. According to the report, Miss Perkins made good on that threat, arriving at the residence and splintering the doorframe as she kicked her way inside. Yet, Cornishia clung to the hope that Shakiya was capable of change. She held on to the belief that the woman she had once fallen for still existed somewhere beneath the rage. She desperately wanted to believe they could reclaim what they had at the beginning. This is the insidious work of a trauma bond. It is a psychological chain that binds a victim to an abuser, forged from a volatile alloy of fear, hope, and calculated emotional manipulation. A South Fulton police lieutenant reported that on September 25, 2021, Shakiya Perkins allegedly committed arson, setting a fire that consumed 2 of Miss Butler's vehicles and inflicted damage upon her home. According to South Fulton Police Chief Keith Meadows, Miss Butler provided investigators with screenshots of text messages allegedly sent by Shakiya Perkins. One chilling message read, quote, "Soon you will be dead and I'll be in jail, and that's fine." Another stated, quote, "I'm going for first degree, not second degree. Stamp that," unquote. As the months wore on, a grim understanding began to dawn on Cornishia. Shakiya was not going to change. The campaign of violence would not cease, and to remain in the relationship was to gamble with her own life. In 2022, Cornishia made the courageous choice that countless victims of domestic abuse find almost impossible. She severed the connection. She terminated the relationship. She informed Shakiya that it was over, that she could no longer endure the abuse, and that her priority was to shield herself and her children. It is the advice universally given to victims. Just get out, walk away. You are worth more than this. But a crucial piece of this puzzle is often tragically misunderstood. For a victim of domestic violence, the act of leaving is the single most perilous moment. Data reveals a woman is 75 times more likely to be murdered by her abuser as she attempts to leave than if she stays. This was a statistic Cornishia was about to experience in the most devastating way possible. The breakup did not bring an end to the obsession. Shaki refused to accept Cornishia's departure, unleashing months of relentless stalking, harassment, and threats that grew increasingly menacing. Cornishia's phone became a conduit for messages that swung wildly between desperate pleading and raw, violent rage. Digital records of these exchanges, which later circulated publicly, paint a disturbing portrait of Shaki's fixation and spiraling fury. There is a uniquely haunting quality to the realization that the last day of one's life often begins with a deceptive, almost mundane sense of normalcy. Cornishia Butler had no premonition that November 16, 2022, would be the day her deepest fears were fully realized. Shakiya Perkins arrived at the house in East Point, Georgia, the very home the two women had once built together, in a time before their relationship had curdled into a death sentence. A restraining order was in place. There was a documented history of escalating violence, and yet, despite every legal and logical barrier that should have separated them, they were in the same house that day. The precise catalyst for the final confrontation remains shrouded in some mystery. But one fact is chillingly clear. Cornishia was being recorded when it happened. It is unknown if she was on a video call, broadcasting on a social media platform, or recording for her own safety. What is known is that a camera lens served as an unblinking witness to the end of her life. This fact is both a forensic asset and a profound tragedy. It supplied indisputable proof of the events, but it also meant that Cornishia's final, terrified moments are forever frozen in a digital archive, a permanent, horrifying record of her death. In that final recording, Cornishia can be heard speaking. She said something described only as the truth that apparently propelled Shakiya beyond any point of return. Was it a final declaration that she was never coming back? Was it a warning that she would report this latest violation? Or was it merely the wrong combination of words spoken at the wrong time to a mind that had surrendered to absolute chaos? Whatever those words were, they were her last. The sound of the gunshot was abrupt, absolute. Shakiya Perkins shot Cornishia Butler in the head inside the home. There appeared to be no last-minute reprieve, no final plea. There was no chance for self-defense, no pathway for escape. As South Fulton Police Chief Keith Meadows later confirmed, the act was a terrifying fulfillment of a written promise. When Shakiya Perkins had allegedly texted, quote, "Soon you will be dead and I'll be in jail and that's fine," end quote. "I'm going for first degree, not second degree." Stamp that. In a single moment, a mother of 4 was extinguished. A woman who had fought desperately for a new beginning, who had made the difficult choice to save herself, who had taken every prescribed step to survive, was ultimately consumed by the very violence she had tried so hard to outrun. Emergency responders were dispatched. They arrived to a scene of irreversible tragedy. There was nothing that could be done. Cornishia Butler was declared dead at the residence. Shakiya Perkins was taken into custody and charged with murder. The woman who had been arrested on 4 separate occasions for acts of violence against the same person was now facing prosecution for the ultimate crime. But the arrest was too late. Any intervention had come too late, and whatever justice might be rendered in a courtroom, it would arrive far too late for Cornishia Butler. Her children, a collection of young faces at varying ages, were now permanently severed from their mother. Her voice would become a digital echo, confined to old recordings. Her embrace, a phantom sensation that would fade with time. They would be raised under the weight of a terrible truth. Their mother was stolen by someone who professed to love her, while the very system meant to be her shield had utterly collapsed. In the cold reality of the digital age, the video of Cornishia's last moments reportedly became a spectacle, spreading across the internet as such graphic material often does. An audience of strangers, people who knew nothing of her life or her private war, watched the final act of her tragedy unfold on their screens. This is the grotesque nature of modern tragedy. It is repurposed as content, an item to be shared, debated, and consumed by the anonymous masses. But Cornishia Butler was not an abstract piece of content. She was a person, a mother, a daughter and a friend, a human being who was owed a long life, a life filled with happiness, surrounded by those who held a genuine love for her. Instead, she was reduced to a statistic, another entry in the grim ledger of domestic violence homicides, one more preventable death, one more indictment of a system that consistently fails the vulnerable. In the aftermath, Shakiya Perkins was charged with murder, along with other offenses connected to the killing of Cornishia Butler. The case against her was not merely strong, it was absolute. The crime itself had been recorded, a final, damning piece of evidence in a long, documented history of abuse, threats, and calculated violence. For any prosecutor, the case was ironclad. The wheels of justice turned, and in July of 2025, almost 3 years after Cornishia's death, Shakiya Perkins offered a guilty plea to the murder charges. The court delivered its sentence, life in prison, but with the possibility of parole. The case was handled by Fulton County Senior Assistant District Attorney Travis Thomas. He later spoke on the plea agreement and the subsequent conviction. The guilty plea served a specific, merciful purpose. It spared Cornishia's family the compounded trauma of a trial, where the agonizing details of her death would be publicly dissected. It meant they would not have to witness the video of her final moments, or endure a defense attorney's attempts to minimize or somehow justify the unjustifiable. For some observers, a life sentence is the embodiment of justice. For others, it is a hollow phrase. A life sentence that might not truly mean life offers a disquieting thought. the possibility of freedom for someone who annihilated an entire family. But this reveals the inherent flaw in the concept of justice in cases of this nature. No punishment can ever truly balance the scales. No number of years behind bars will bring Cornishia back. No sentence will undo the psychological devastation inflicted upon her children. No verdict can grant her family the closure they so desperately crave. The unalterable fact is that Cornishia Butler is dead, and her children are motherless. The system failed her, and the incarceration of Shakiya Perkins does not reverse any of it. Following the conviction, Cornishia's family issued statements to the public. They were filled with grief, but also with a profound frustration at a system that had watched the danger escalate and did nothing. They spoke of the woman they lost. She was not just a victim in a news story, but the irreplaceable heart of their family, leaving a void that could never be filled. Her 4 children now faced a journey into adulthood without their mother's presence, her guidance, or her support. Every milestone that should have been a shared celebration, graduations, weddings, will be marked by her absence. The birth of grandchildren will happen without her. Every joyous occasion will be tinged with the sadness of what was stolen. Every family gathering will forever feel incomplete. While the conviction of Shakiya Perkins does establish accountability, and that is important, it sends a clear signal that domestic violence is a crime with severe consequences. But this is a reactive measure, not a preventative one. It does not represent protection for the next person in danger, and it in no way signifies the kind of fundamental, systemic change that could have intervened and saved Cornishia's life. Justice served after a life has been extinguished is not a victory. It is a failure wrapped in the formalities of legal proceedings. When all the legal arguments and systemic critiques are stripped away, what remains is a person. Cornishia Butler was 31 years old, and she deserved infinitely more than the fate she was dealt. She deserved to watch her 4 children grow up. She deserved to see them walk across a graduation stage, to celebrate their victories, and to help them navigate their defeat. She deserved to one day become a grandmother, to pour her strength and wisdom into a new generation. She deserved to feel safe in her own home. She deserved to sleep without being haunted by fear, to answer her door without panic, to live a life not dictated by constantly looking over her shoulder. She deserved to experience a love that did not inflict pain and a partnership that did not carry the threat of violence. She deserved companionship that did not end in her destruction. She simply deserved to live. Now, her 4 children must carry her memory forward. They will become the keepers of her story, speaking of their mother's resilience, her love, and her unyielding spirit. Their tribute to her will be to live the lives she wanted for them, to break the very cycles of violence that took her from them, and to refuse to let her death be just another statistic. For those who love Cornishia, she will never be a memory. For her family, the ache of her absence will be a constant companion. Her absence creates a void that can never be filled. Yet her story stands as a chilling testament to the gravity of the work that lies ahead. It is a stark illustration of why the fight to shield the vulnerable can never cease, and why a demand for accountability from the very systems designed for protection is not just necessary, but critical. November 16, 2022 was a date that should have passed without incident, lost to the unremarkable flow of time. The life Cornishia Butler was meant to live, raising her children, experiencing the simple passage of years, was irrevocably stolen, leaving behind only the anatomy of a tragedy, a case study in failure. Yet, in the wake of the wreckage, a choice emerges. Her death could recede into the background, becoming another statistic, a headline that flickers and dies, one more soul consumed by a system indifferent to change. Or it could become the catalyst. It could ignite a resolve to demand more, to perform better, to be better. Her name, Cornishia Butler, became a rallying cry. The narrative insists she be remembered not merely as a victim, but as a person of substance, an individual who was loved, one who had a right to a long and full life. She was owed more. Safety was her right. Life was her right. The haunting takeaway is a silent message to anyone trapped in the shadows of danger. Help is a lifeline. Safety is not a privilege. Protection is a fundamental need. The right to live is absolute. Jamini Danoy. The story of Cornishia Butler is a haunting reminder that behind every true crime headline is a life that deserved a future. A mother whose love was her children's entire world. Her tragedy exposes the terrifying reality that domestic violence does not simply end when a victim decides to walk away. In fact, the act of leaving, is often the most dangerous crossroads a person will ever face. It serves as a profound indictment of a system that watches red flags turn into fire and threats turn into blood, yet fails to provide a shield until it is tragically too late. This narrative teaches us that we cannot afford to be silent bystanders in the face of escalating control and intimidation. We must learn to recognize that a cycle of abuse is a psychological trap, fueled by a toxic mix of fear and misplaced hope that no one should have to navigate alone. True justice isn't found in a courtroom after a life has been extinguished. It is found in the proactive protection of the vulnerable and the collective courage to intervene before the final gunshot. We must transform our collective grief into a relentless demand for systemic change, ensuring that every person has the absolute right to live, to breathe, and to be safe in their own home. We owe it to Cornishia and the 4 children she left behind to ensure her story becomes the catalyst that finally breaks the cycle of silence.